Hi, Fearless Church. Thanks for tuning in to catch the sermon from this past Sunday. Real quick, throughout the month of April, we're going to be taking a special offering called the Love More Offering in order to help the Dayton community get through this coronavirus pandemic. We as a church are going to match dollar for dollar up to $35,000. Our goal is at least $70,000. Every single penny we raise is going to be given away to local nonprofits that are in need, local small businesses, and smaller churches that need more support during this crazy time. For more information, or if you'd like to give to this, just go ahead to lovemore.befearless.org. This week we started a new sermon series. It's called Socially Distant. We are finding that this season of social distancing has actually revealed a lot about how distant we already were from one another. We're excited to see what God has to say to you as you listen to this past week's sermon.
Social distancing. So what's been the most challenging part of this whole social distancing for you? I don't know about you, but for me, it's the video conference call. You know, when you're on the video and then finally you can hear what they say. It's so frustrating. Or the time when you're on the call and then all of a sudden, and you just wait to say, did they freeze or is it a dramatic pause, right? But for some of you, it might be, you know what? Everything was going fine. My kids were making great grades. I would help with homework. And now I'm their math teacher. And I'm teaching chemistry or language arts. And all of a sudden, you're beginning to realize all this anxiety that you had in junior high because you couldn't figure out what the nucleus and the electron and all this kind of stuff is. Or maybe it's working from home. And you think, man, this will be easy. I'll just kind of set up. I can stay in my pajamas, my slippers. And then all of a sudden, somebody's knocking on the door. Or the cat knocks over your coffee. I mean, this is crazy. Or maybe it's the fact that when you go to Walmart or any grocery store, now you're putting on gloves and a mask. Like, what's been the most challenging? For many of us, it's just not being able to hang out with our friends. I mean, I miss going to the movies, concerts. I miss sports. I mean, come on. Where are sports? It's so challenging. And as you think about this social distancing, what I want to ask you about is probably, maybe I'm going to argue even more important. I want to ask you, when you think about these challenges, what about your relationships? In fact, I want to ask you a question. How has social distancing affected your relationships? I mean, I'm talking about the people you live with, that you work with, that you go to school with, people that you call your friends, your extended family, your neighbors, even people you go to church with. See, this social distancing thing, what it's done is it's created a whole new way we interact with one another. For some of us, we are interacting a whole lot more than we used to. I mean, you're seeing and talking to people a whole lot more because now you're together in the same house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For others, it's a whole lot less. I mean, there's some people at work that you would call a friend that, let's be honest, you haven't talked to them in a month. For some of you, it's a whole lot more interaction. Now you're having a daily Zoom call with your boss, whereas before maybe he would check in on you or she would check in on you once a week, or maybe it's how you're interacting with your employees. Maybe it's a whole lot less. But whatever it is, how has it affected you? In fact, let me go one step farther. Let me ask you this question. Are your relationships, as you think about all these relationships in your life, do you feel like they're stronger? Or maybe they're strained. Or maybe they're just stagnant. They're not going anywhere. What would you say? And I want you to take just a minute. And I want you to think about some of your relationships that if you were totally honest with me, totally honest with yourself, you would say, these are the names of the people that my relationships are strained. And if you need to make up a name because one of those people is sitting real close to you, that's okay for now, but you know who you're talking about, right? And just write down maybe 3 or 4 names. And I want you to take a few moments. These are those relationships where you would say, you know, over the last couple of days or weeks, like honestly, there's some tension in these relationships. So take just a few minutes and write this down. Write these names down. Who would those names be?
Hey, my name's Matt.
And I'm Chris.
and we are pastors here at Fearless Church in Dayton, Ohio. And you just heard our other pastor, Chris, the balder one, give us a challenge to grab a pen, grab a pad of paper, and write down the names of people that we are feeling tense with right now. We're experiencing some relational tension. So what we want to do is, as you participate in the activity, we're just going to participate with you. We want to model it. We want to talk through it a little bit. If you ignore us completely for the next couple minutes, no problem. If you're focused on your list, that's great. But we're just going to walk it through with you.
Yeah. So one of the names that I am going to write down that comes to mind is my son, Eli. He's 5 years old, and this time has been awesome with him. I've had a lot of great intentional time to have fun and get to play with him more than I usually do. At the same time, there's no escaping him, right? Like there's no activities that you can just go and do all your fail-safe options of, like, if all else fails, we could at least hop in the car and go to X, Y, or Z. That X, Y, or Z is now not an option. And so I've just felt like, man, I've been losing my temper. I've been more impatient, just frustrated with him and how loud he can be and all that kind of stuff. So I'm literally going to write Eli down on my list.
I can relate not so much with my kids, but being locked in the same house and having no other outlets to pursue has caused all kinds of relational stress with me and my wife, wife Jenna. And I've talked to her about this, so I'm not speaking out of turn here. She knows that we're going to talk about this. But the last 3 weeks of our marriage have honestly been probably the hardest 3 weeks of the last 3 years for us. Just more time together. We're communicating more, but it's leading to more miscommunications, and we're just, we're getting on each other's nerves. Our routines are clashing a little bit, work from home and all that stuff. Maybe you're experiencing the same thing. But I think that what this season has done has put a big highlighter to the fact that we thought we were really good at relationships. We thought, man, we're finally hitting our stride in marriage. We're figuring this thing out. Really, I think this season has revealed that we're probably just really good at our routine. And as soon as our routine is shaken up, we've got a lot of strife to deal with. And so we're having difficult conversations, long conversations, in some cases painful, emotional conversations. But at least now we are having them as a team. We're going to work through this thing together. And honestly, I think we'll thank God for the growth that he brings in this season. So I'm writing down my wife, Jenna.
Yeah, I think another area for not just for me, but for all of us, that we're feeling tension is probably work relationships. And you probably think like, oh, these guys are pastors, so they don't have any tension and they're perfect in the way that they work together, which is not at all true. Like we have been instituting this thing where we run through the sermon the week before we give it. And it's this awesome time where you get to encourage other people about like, hey, that was awesome, or take that out. That joke was not funny. That's very helpful for me. But that has turned into, now you send a video to the whole staff and they watch it and then they give you comments, and all you get is a spreadsheet with everyone's thoughts. And like, I had to I called Matt because I was like, dude, this like hurts. Like, this was a great time before, but now I feel like insecure about what I produced. Like, I'm dejected. Like, it's hard just talking to a camera like we're literally doing now. We're getting more used to it, but it's very difficult to do these things. And so I just had to express like some frustration, and like there's tension in those relationships because of the difference in all of our work relationships and just the way that we do our work.
Yeah, when you see people face to face, you hear their heart. It's not just a cold comment in a spreadsheet. You hear their heart and assume the best about them because they're your friend. But if you don't connect with them face to face, it's pretty hard to do that. And honestly, like, I'm recognizing we used to bump into each other around the office all the time, and so you just have conversations about people's life and family and what they care about most, and it builds this relationship. But now I have to go out of my way to do it. I recognized last week I'm starting to have some frustration with some people on staff, and so I started making phone calls and just saying, hey, how's your wife? How are your kids right now? What's life look like for you? And all of a sudden I have these great conversations, and we laugh and joke, and I remember that person's my friend. They're not just this annoyance that I have to deal with to get my work done. They're a great friend, and they're a person, and God loves them, and I love them. They care about me. Like, it was just such a refreshing exercise for me. And so we want to encourage you. Like, this isn't just something to, write some names on a piece of paper and then crumble it up, throw it away, and do nothing with it. As you tune in for the remainder of this message, Pastor Chris is going to share with you a challenge. He's going to challenge you to put some feet to this, to take some action. And when you do, I wholeheartedly believe you're going to see God in the middle of it. So stay tuned with us. We're excited for what God is going to do in you and through you today.
So as you look at those names on that list, you see some names of people that you interact with before all this COVID-19 a whole lot, some of them not as much. But I want to ask you this question. Why do you think those relationships are now strained? what has caused that tension in between you and them? And I think what it is we are definitely in a season of stress, right? There's a lot of unknown. And here's the reality. Stress has changed things and changed dynamics. And the reason is because of this. Stress reveals what distance conceals. Stress reveals what distance conceals. Here's what I mean by that. Like, we naturally move away from situations and people that stress us. I mean, that's totally normal. You're limiting your interaction with them. In fact, part of what we do as a culture, let's just be honest, is we busy ourselves at work or at school or in our social activities. And we keep so busy that even though we interact with each other, the truth is we're very distant from each other. Conversations are, hey, how you doing? I'm all right. They revolve around the sports or the latest movies or maybe a few pictures you may share of your grandkids. But ultimately, you're distant from people. But here's what's weird. During this season in our life, as stress has raised, maybe it's financially, maybe it's with your health, maybe it's in other areas of your life with homeschooling or working from home, whatever it might be, as stress increases, we begin to realize that some of this distancing that we have between ourselves and those that we love and care about, those that we work with, those that we interact with, it's beginning to reveal there's some damage that maybe this distance has been concealing in our lives for a while. So as you think about how you are navigating, and I am navigating this season of, quote, social distancing, let's realize that this stress is beginning to reveal some things that are true about some of our relationships that aren't so good. So what would the Bible have to say about that? Look at what he says in 1 John chapter 3, verse 11. This is the message you've heard from the very beginning. So he's saying, from the beginning of creation, like this is the message we hear over and over. From the beginning of Jesus' ministry, we hear this over and over and over. And he says, we should love one another. Love one another. And we think about all this stress in our relationship and all this revealing of what's happening in the damage in some of our distant relationships that we thought maybe were closer when they were or stronger than they were, and now they're strained. Ultimately, we're told, no, we've got to continue to press in. We've got to continue to love one another. And then he says something strange. The very next verse, check this out. He says, we must not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and killed his brother. He goes back to the very first murder that we have recorded in the history of the world, a big brother and a little brother. Do you know the story of Cain and Abel? If you don't, check this out.
So this morning, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's from Genesis chapter 4. Now this story is about two brothers, and their mom and dad, they're actually Adam and Eve. Now Cain is the older of the two, and Cain is a farmer. Abel, who's the youngest, he's a shepherd. Now they grew up offering sacrifices to the Lord. And so in this particular story, Cain gives his offering, and it's of his harvest. Now Abel, he gives his offering to the Lord, and it is the firstborn of his flock. And so with these offerings, with these sacrifices, God knows the heart behind the sacrifices. And so in this story, God chose Abel's sacrifice because he knew Abel's heart. Now this kind of ticked off Cain. It made him very angry that God chose Abel's offering over his. And God actually saw this in Cain. He saw his anger, and he actually warned Cain and said, Cain, because of your pride and your selfishness, this is dangerous. But Cain really didn't listen, and he just allowed that anger to kind of swell up in him. And so he was out in the field with his brother Abel, and this anger, this jealousy, everything just overtook his heart, and he actually killed his brother Abel. Now, immediately, Cain wanted to hide from that sin, and he wanted to hide the fact that he had killed his brother. And then God comes looking for him and actually asks him, he says, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain responds by saying, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? He immediately lied to God, God who knows everything. And really and truly, this saddened God's heart. And so he knew that he'd have to punish this sin. Cain was sent away from God. He was no longer in God's presence.
What a crazy story. I mean, the anger and the jealousy and all that's coming up. And John asked us, he said, look, don't be like Cain. And he asked this question, and he says, well, why did he kill him? Why did Cain kill Abel? And he answers his own question. He says, the reason why is because Cain had been doing what was evil, and his brother Abel had been doing what was righteous. And you say, wait a second. Like, as I think about the story, both these guys bring an offering or a sacrifice to God. Cain was a farmer, right? He brought this grain offering. Abel was a shepherd. He brought the firstborn of the lambs, of the sheep. And you say, well, why did God accept one and reject the other? Now, the Bible doesn't clearly tell us why, but as you look into the New Testament often reveals and illuminates what we find in the Old Testament. The author of Hebrews, he said it this way and pointed it to like this. He said, it was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is long dead, he still speaks to us by his example of faith. The reality is, when it came time to present a sacrifice or an offering to God, Abel did it by faith. And he said, I'm going to hold nothing back from God. I'm going to bring my very best, the firstborn of my sheep. But Cain, he acted more out of obligation. Kind of like, what's the minimum requirement of this? And so when Cain realized, man, God has rejected me and God has rejected my half-hearted attempt at pursuing him, Cain became angry. He was angry at God. And listen to the conversation. This is what God says. He says, why are you so angry? The Lord asked Cain. Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right. You will be accepted. This is God's heartbeat, to accept all of us, that we would all be part of his family. And he's saying, look, Cain, look, there is a way to be made right with me if you'll just do what's right. Now, I don't know about you, but in this story, I think I relate more to Cain than to Abel. Not that I've ever killed anybody or even thought about killing somebody, but the reality is, like Cain, I kind of think, man, some of the stuff that I do for God or in pursuit of God is more out of kind of guilty obligation than faithful love and commitment. I mean, sometimes I'm asking myself, what's the minimum I can do to be made right with God? And God says, that's not how you approach me. I think so many times I want to come to God, you want to come to God, and we want to do it our way. Not God's way, like this is my way. We want to create our own truth. Like this is my truth. I take a little bit of the Bible, a little bit of my experience, a little bit of something I read online, and I create this belief system. I create this truth for me. We want to keep our own life. Like I want to do things my way, my own wishes, my wants, desires, and I just want to add a little Jesus. And God says, no. Like if you're gonna be made right with me, you gotta approach me the right way. And there is a way to be made right with God. And that's through Jesus. In fact, Jesus said one of the most controversial things. Listen to this. This is even bothers people today. Listen to what Jesus said. He says, I am the way, not a way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then he says this sentence, and I know for some of you this is hard for you to believe. Others of us, it's radically changed their life. He says, nobody's going to come to the Father. Nobody's going to come to God except through me. Jesus is that access point. He is the only way to be made right with God. And when God's interacting with Cain, he's look, I want to accept you. I want to connect with you. I want you to connect with me, but you've got to come at this thing the right way. But if you refuse, if you reject me, if you reject this right way, or even today, if you and I reject Jesus and we say we just can't handle that there's only this one way and that no one accesses God except through Jesus, he warns Cain. Look what he says. Check this out. If you refuse to do what is right, you choose to do it your own way, you choose to come at me half-heartedly, he says, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Here's the reality. When we reject a righteousness that can be had with God, to be made right with God, only through faith in Christ, when we reject that, then we better be really careful. Because eventually sin is going to overtake us. And sin will ultimately lead to death and destruction in our lives and in all of our relationships. And that's exactly what happened to Cain. This relationship or lack of relationship that he had with God ultimately affected his relationship and was reflected and expressed in his relationship with other people, specifically with Abel. Same way in our lives. If we lack a relationship and a connection with God, eventually it's going to affect all those relationships around us. So what did Cain do? Well, he got really angry at God and got jealous of his brother. You heard the story. He ultimately killed his baby brother. And this is John's point. He's like, don't love like Cain. Like, don't be like Cain. He didn't love God. He didn't love people. He rejected God's way. And he said, look, you can't do this. Instead, we have to connect with people. We have to love one another based on and foundationally on our relationship with God. In fact, John continues, and watch what he says. He says, we love because he, talking about God, first loved us. See, because we've experienced this relationship with God, because he's first loved us, he can love us and love to us and through us. Because he loved us, we have the ability to love him back. Because he loved us, we have the ability to love one another. And we've got to love in this way that says, you know what? My connection to God is going to affect my connection to you. In fact, John presses a little bit farther. Watch what he says. He says, if anyone says he loves God, so you're raising your hand, you're singing praises, I'm so devoted. He says, but yet you hate your brother. You're a liar. You're like Cain. You're lying. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. Do you see what he's doing here? He's saying, my relationship with other people actually reveals a lot about my relationship with God. Let me take it a step further. My love for other people actually reveals a lot about my love for God. And so if there's stress and strain in your life and in my life with other people around us, maybe we need to look one step farther and say, you know what? Maybe there's some stress and some strain in my relationship with God. Why? Well, because stress reveals what distance conceals. Like, is the stress I'm having with you, if the stress you're having with me, if our stress is there, does it reveal more about our relationship, or maybe it reveals about this distance between me and God? I mean, I asked you at the very beginning, how are your relationships going? And I ask you again, like, how is this whole social distancing thing affecting your relationships, not just with one another, but your relationship with God? Like, as you experience conversations and things with those in your house, those at work, through these Zoom calls, at school, whatever it might be, these social interactions that are sometimes more stressful and more challenged in this season, is it maybe revealing more about your distance from God than you ever thought? See, when I lack patience with other people, man, I'm telling you, consistently, my relationship with other people is a great barometer of how things are going with me and God. Because the more I experience God's grace, God's love, God's forgiveness, God's patience, God's kindness, God's gentleness in my life, guess what happens? At the end of the day, I begin to produce more gentleness, kindness, love, mercy, grace in other people's lives. I begin to produce what God is embedding and doing inside of my heart because of my relationship with God. The question is can we truly love God and not love people? You know what John says? No way. This is the commandment that we have heard from Jesus. Like, whoever loves God must also love his brother. So in the midst of this, we have got to figure out how to love one another better. So that's why I think it's so important that you log in and you watch these next couple of weeks. We're jumping into this series called Socially Distant. And it's just recognizing not what's happening just today, but what's been happening now for months, or let's just be honest, years. How you and I have been to take steps back away from one another and socially distance ourselves emotionally, relationally, and all of a sudden, we're not loving each other the way that God commands. In fact, the heartbeat behind this series is for you and I to figure out, open up God's Word and figure out, how do we build bridges, not barriers, with all the people God's put in our lives? How do we build those bridges? How do we, like God, build a bridge to connect with people? And you know who's the master bridge builder? It's God. God cares about building a bridge so much that he sent his only son. He took this initiative and said, I'm going to send Jesus because I care about building bridges, not barriers. In fact, even today, the story of Cain and Abel, let me share with you just real quick, we'll do this fast, a couple of things that I think about in building bridges between my life and others based on what I watched God do in that story. The very first thing is we've got to take notice. We got to be paying attention, asking ourselves this question, what is that person on your list? Let your eyes drop down real quick. Stop looking at your phone or your laptop real quick. Look at that piece of paper. Look at one of those names. You don't have to say it out loud, but ask yourself, what is their perspective? Notice what God saw and what we see actually is true about Cain. It says this, it says, Cain was very angry. So ask yourself, what is the thoughts and emotions this person's experiencing? Sometimes you may look and you may say, they seem very angry, but the reality is they're very fearful. And you're looking and you're saying, I'm going to be taking notice. And he noticed the second part. He says, he looked, go back real quick. Thank you. He looked dejected. So this is an opinion, right? And it's a perspective. We say, man, it looks like this person is scared. It looks like this person is hurt. And so we take notice of what's going on. And then after we take notice, we take initiative. Take initiative. That means we don't stay on the sidelines. And God is our best example. One of the Bible verses that you probably have heard, many of you have memorized, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. What did God do? He gave. He took the initiative. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He took the initiative. God steps first. In the same way, if we're going to build bridges, we got to notice what's going on in this relationship. What's the perspective of the other person, not just you? You know your perspective, you know your experience. What's their perspective? Take the initiative, and when you take the initiative, ask questions. This is a lot more than making statements. This is a lot more than, you said this and this is why I feel this way. It's not about your agenda. It's saying, I want to know what's going on. I'm going to build that bridge. When Cain was so angry and so dejected because he felt rejected by God, listen to what God says to him. He says, why are you so angry? Why do you look so dejected? And I love to say it this way. A lot of times I'll ask questions of my friends and my family, and sometimes when there's tension, I'll say, tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what happened. And what is an important question, but why is next level. Why pursues the heart. This is what you said. Let me ask you a question. Why did you say that? This is what you did. Man, can you share with me why you did that? Again, we're taking notice of what's going on in that relationship. We're taking the initiative to actually pursue that person, and then we're asking questions. And in the midst of that, I want you to watch, and this is something that I notice, we not only ask questions, but we share the intent. Why are you asking those questions? And God was very clear with Cain. And it's funny because the same kind of conversation, the same intent he had with Cain, he has with you and I today. And watch what he says. He says, you will be accepted if you do what's right. What does that tell you? God wants to accept you. God wants to restore and rebuild his relationship with you. Sin separates us from God. It distances us from God. It creates us a social distance, if you will, between us and our Creator. But God says, I'll do whatever it takes. My desire is to restore and rebuild. In the same way, God says, because that's my desire for my people, I want my people to have that same desire, not only with himself, with God, but with other people. We ought to be known. God's people ought to be known as people that are all about restoring and rebuilding relationships, offering forgiveness and grace and patience like never before. And so it's all right for you to say, as you're building that bridge, you know what? Like, man, I want to fix this. And in humility, it's okay to say to your friend, to that family member, to where that tension is, man, I don't know how to do this, but man, I want to know why this happened, and I want to take whatever steps. Like, my intent is to restore and rebuild our relationship. You say, Chris, this is a lot of work. Like, this does not sound easy. And this is the last thing I would tell you. If we're going to be people that build bridges, not barriers, we have to remember the reason. Why would we do this? Why would we go to all this effort? Because all of you are smart enough to know as you walk through this process and over the next couple weeks as we learn even more practical ways to build bridges, like this isn't a 100% success rate thing. Why would we do this? Why would we do this? Because of what John said. We love because he first loved us. We build bridges, not barriers, because God first built a bridge, not a barrier to us. We reflect the heart of God by saying, you know what? These relationships in my life that are strained, because of the stress of what I'm going on, it's only revealing what's been true, honestly, in that relationship for maybe years. But because of my relationship with Christ, I'm going to let that affect my relationship with you. And we begin to restore and rebuild, and we begin to build bridges, not barriers, because our God is a God who built bridges, not barriers, to us. What if that became true of us? What if this whole socially distanced season that we are all in right now, that is indeed at times stressful, what if it's all about God forming in us and helping us to become a lot more like him? A lot more like him in that we are restoring and rebuilding relationships. We are building bridges, not barriers. What if you were that one in the family to build bridges among some of the other family members that are having stress? What if we bridged racial divides? What if marriages were restored? What could God do in this season when we don't walk away from it, but we press in? We close the distance and say, God, I want to love people because you loved me.
Hey, Fearless, this is Grace Volts and Chris Volts.
What's up?
What's up? Okay, so one of our core values at Fearless Church in 3 words is take new ground. It's our heart that all of you would take new ground, that we would push you to grow deeper with God in different ways every single week. So as we wrap up this week, Chris and I are going to talk through the questions that were given at the end of the service online. If you want any of these questions for reference, we're going to go ahead and put them in our episode notes. So if you click on the episode, you'll be able to read them. And we would encourage you, even after you're done listening, to find somebody to talk to about them. If you don't have anyone to talk to about them, that's okay. You can journal, you can pray. We really just want you to sift through these things and figure out how you can take new ground in your own life.
Well, let's just jump right in. I already sort of got to answer question number 1 because I was a part of the sermon today, which was awesome, a lot of fun. But I'm going to ask Grace this question. How has social distancing affected your relationships? Are your relationships stronger, strained, or stagnant?
As I was thinking about this after the sermon, there's definitely a relationship that has become a little bit strained. Some people know we have a little girl living with us, and we're going to be getting custody of her really soon, but we have a really incredible relationship with her grandparents. Through this social distancing, they haven't been able to see her at all. We agreed with them the safest option is for her to just stay with us, which has been a huge blessing. But it's also, I think, created a lot of strain on our relationship with them just because she doesn't get to see them and they really miss her. And it's also just really difficult when we do see them because we don't really know how to act. And I think as we're distanced from them, it's like, it's easy for us to like hold the time that they want to have with her against that. I feel like it's more of a competition. There's just way more strain because we're not communicating as much. We don't get to see them one-on-one. But then overall, I think that I am just an introvert at heart. So I prefer being alone. I love my own space, and because of that, I've easily retreated into isolation. And I realized this week, honestly, like I reached a point where I was feeling really depressed. I was feeling really anxious. And I think that all of my relationships in general are very strained because I have not been investing in them. And this week I reached a point where I just knew that my isolation wasn't good for me, and it wasn't good for any of my relationships. I felt distant from everybody. So I would say, yeah, like a lot of my relationships are stagnant because I'm just not putting work into them because I sort of liked it in the beginning, but now it's like, oh gosh, I don't know if I like this anymore.
Yeah, I think I'll go the opposite way. Like,
Yeah.
I think our relationship is stronger between like you and I. That's probably
is
the
true.
only one though. Like literally all the other ones are either strained or stagnant or whatever, but ours, like we've gotten to spend a lot of time together, and I feel like more of a team than we usually are. We're less separate from one another.
That's true.
But I do think that feeds into question number 2 for me, which is like, what is the stress of social distancing revealed about your relationship with God and then others?
Sure.
And for me personally, I think I've been thinking about like, okay, I'm having a hard time being distant from other people. I love people. But I think one of the things I've been processing through and realizing is like, I get a lot of affirmation from people and my interactions with them. Like I pull a lot of that, who I am and my identity. And like a lot of people think I'm funny, including myself. And
You're so annoying.
and like, and I mean, that's funny, but it is like true. Like I pull a lot of validation from being able to make people laugh and being able to invest in those relationships and all those things. I think it's revealed that like, I don't fully put my identity in who Jesus says I am. I'm looking to other people to inform who I think I am. And like not having that validation has been difficult. It's been frustrating for me to realize that and process it.
Yeah, I think witnessing that has been interesting because I think that there is part of me that doesn't understand. And then there's also another part of me that realizes like your strength and how much you enjoy having people around because it comes easily to you. Like you know that it's good for you and you like it. I know that it's good for me and it's annoying. And so when I had the opportunity to not be around people, I very quickly retreated into an unhealthy place. So I think that it's revealed, like it has revealed to me my need for people, even though it's not necessarily my preference, for sure.
That sounds like you're talking about your relationship with other people, which is really good. This question 2 is asking, okay, what does it reveal about your relationship with God as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are aspects of it that I've had a great relationship with the Lord. I mean, obviously there's ups and downs like there are with anybody, but going into this season, we were very busy. And I think that God was very much another item on my checklist a lot of times. Like, okay, I did my Bible reading. I've had my time with him so that I can sustain myself through the day. And I really wasn't abiding in him. And it was really cool. Even like the other day, we were sort of having a disagreement and I found myself praying in the middle of our disagreement. And at the end, you were like, how did your attitude change so quickly? Like, how did you go from being super angry? Do you remember that?
Oh, you were angry.
I was so angry.
And then you weren't.
And that, and it was because I like prayed. And I think that this season has really taught me to lean on God in little moments, like especially even with the kids. Like I have the time and the space in my mind to pray and ask him to help me handle specific situations because I'm not pressed for time. I have margin in my brain to think like, going down this road leads me to trouble. I need to like ask God to help me out here. And through that, it's been really cool to see how he's just shown up. Like even when you asked me that, I'm like, wow, I prayed and God helped me change my attitude from an attitude of anger and frustration towards my husband to one of understanding and being willing to listen. So I think that it's definitely been really good for my relationship with God. I know that's not the case for everybody, but okay.
Well, yeah. So let's get practical then.
Okay.
Question number 3 says, what is one thing you can do this week to start building a bridge towards one of the strained or stagnant relationships in your life? So I think for me, I'll go first so that I get to steal the one maybe you were going to say.
Yeah.
We talked about our relationship with Bella, the little girl who lives with us, her grandparents. I think we talked to them today and we sort of scheduled out a time this week, feeling that relationship being strained and the frustration and all this kind of stuff. We just scheduled a time to say, okay, let's sit down and talk about how we're feeling, our expectations, what we're going to do as this thing continues to move on and we can't see you. What are we going to do? How are we going to operate? And so I think that's one of the ways we're going to try to build that bridge
For sure.
Back to them. For me, I mentioned this earlier in the sermon, when I was that interview with Matt, I sort of talked about the pastoral relationships that are a little bit strained.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing as I've been reflecting on it, like I I'm usually like when I see someone in the office, I see them and I can encourage them and I can laugh with them and all that. And that's been lost since we don't really see each other in the office.
Yeah.
But I think I'm just going to start encouraging people. Like anything I see from them, I'm going to intentionally say like, okay, let me think about how to encourage Christy or Chris or Matt and make sure that I don't lose that part of it. Cause that, I don't know, obviously encouraging people it just spreads. It's like it spreads joy. It spreads good juju or whatever you want to call it. Like it's just a good thing for relationships. And so I want to try to do that and start building that bridge towards everyone on staff.
Yeah. I think it's so funny how when God wants us to work on something, he continues to just bring up opportunities. Like a couple weeks ago, Chris challenged us to reach out to one person a day. And it's like, man, here's just another opportunity. I've put myself in a place of isolation. So I think this week I am just going to start reaching out to my close friends again. I think this week I did not initiate a single conversation. And so I'm really going to try and like ask people about them and how they're doing, ask them how I can be praying for them. So I think that my goal is to just ask one person a day that I'm really close to how I can be praying for them. I want it to have a spiritual aspect to it. Because like, I don't know, he talked about how we love because he first loved us. So I want to love them the way that Jesus would love them. And then I think, man, another way that I can really continue to work on my stagnant or strained relationships is with Eli and Bella. Like I think that just continuing to pray in those moments of strain, that God would give me patience and that I would be able to like not be as angry at them when they're disobeying.
Lord knows we need patience in this season.
Lord knows.
Pray for us, people.
Yes. Prayers appreciated. But yeah, so there was our Take New Ground segment. We're so glad, like if you've tuned in this far, we're so happy that you joined us, and maybe something that we said helped you get to thinking about things that you can be doing this week. But we love you. We're praying for the day that we can meet together in person, and we hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. See ya.
See ya.